The Community Server Connector extension for VS Code supports Apache Felix as one of its runtimes. In my workspace right now, you can see that I've installed a few different extensions. Right now I have Community Server Connector and some of its dependencies, like the remote server protocol. And then I also have some language support and some Java extensions and even some Maven extensions. Because I'd like to deploy to Apache Felix, which is an OSGI container, and code being deployed to Apache Felix should generally be Java-based. In my workspace I have a very simple OSGI bundle. It simply has a start and a stop method. The start method prints hello world, and the stop method prints goodbye world. After being started, a new thread will be launched that will just indicate that something is happening by printing out how many times it's gone through a loop for 2 or 3 seconds at maximum. In order to build this project, I'll go to the Maven project section and right-click on Sample, which is the name of the project, and click Install. This will run the Maven command, and this is not part of the Community Server Connector's tooling. But what it does do is it regenerates this sample jar file. If I go to the server connector and I click Create New Server, it'll ask me if I want to download one or use one on disk. For now, let's go with the download workflow, but if you have one on disk, you can browse to it. I'd like to deploy to Apache Felix 6. It'll ask me to approve the license, which I'll do, and I'll say I agree to it. You can see that the runtime was being downloaded, and now we have an Apache Felix instance already installed. You can start it to make sure it works. And then you can come over and stop it as well. When run via the command line, Apache Felix will dump you into what's called the go-go shell, where you can type commands to deploy or undeploy bundles. But due to the way that we're doing things here, even though it looks like you're seeing the shell, you actually can't communicate back and forth with it. So what usefulness does this extension provide? At this point, you have your bundled up and packaged OSGI jar. You can right-click on it and then click Run on Server. It'll ask you which server, and you of course choose Apache Felix. It'll ask if you wanted to edit any optional deployment parameters. Here you can change the output name or the name of the bundle as it gets deployed. But since Apache Felix doesn't really care much about this, it's not terribly useful. So we'll say no. What you can see here is that the bundle has been properly installed and run and started. And Apache Felix is still running. You can see here that it's still started. If you want to stop the server, you can stop it. The process exits and Apache Felix does not indicate any output. Let's say you want to remove your deployment and start over. So we'll remove it and we'll indicate a publish. The bundle should be removed from Apache Felix's bundles folder. But you might notice that when we start it again, our bundle's still there. The question is why? We've removed it from the bundles folder. Well, Apache Felix, once it's run, will take any bundle in the bundles folder and back it up into the Felix cache. This means that once a bundle has been installed, you either have to remove it via the command line or you have to wipe the cache. To help with this, we've provided a server action where you can say wipe the container cache and restart your server. Now Apache Felix starts without the bundle installed, and it's no longer in the cache or the bundles folder. If you make some changes to your bundle, you can see what happens when you deploy it then too. If we save our Activator, and we come back down to the Maven project and click Install, we'll see that it rebuilds our package. Then we can right-click on the jar and run it on our server again. That's it for our Apache Felix support. It's not a lot, but it's enough to get you started on simple things, and it's enough so that you don't have to keep going back to the terminal or typing arbitrary commands in when you just want to try to test your server or your bundle. The Community Server Connector extension for VS Code also provides support for Apache Karaf, which is a container one level above a raw OSGI container like Apache Felix. Inside of our workspace, we have an extremely simple OSGI bundle project, Maven project. It has an activator and a POM XML, and that's about it. The activator will simply print out when its bundle's been started or when it's been stopped, and it'll also, upon start, just print a little bit for a second or two to indicate that some extra stuff is happening. If you've seen the OSGI Felix, the Apache Felix example, this project is basically identical. If we want to try to run this in Apache Karaf, we can use the Community Server Connector to do it. Before we start, it might be smart to look at the extensions that we have installed. We have the Java extensions, the extensions for Community Server Connector, and the Maven extensions, which should be enough to get started with a simple example like this. To get started with Apache Karaf, you can right-click on your Community Server Connector and say Create New Server. It'll ask if we want to download one, and of course we say yes. If you have one on your disk, you can use that one as well. We'll pick a Apache Karaf 427. It'll ask us to approve the license, and we will. You'll see Apache Karaf is being downloaded. Apache Karaf, as implemented by the Community Server Connector, will run in the background. So when you right-click on it and say Start Server, you're not going to see anything. But after that, you can click a server action and open the Karaf shell. It'll ask you if you recognize the IP address, and you can. With a default installation, the password should just be Karaf. And at this point, you can do all sorts of things, like list the bundles that are available. There are many other commands that you might want to attempt to use, and that's kind of outside the scope of this tutorial. For this example, what we really want to do is we want to deploy our OSGI bundle into Karaf, and maybe start and stop it, and just give a very quick demo of how to do that. So with this in mind, we'll right-click on our sample jar. If you don't have one yet, you can go to the Maven project and click Install. Now the jar should appear, and you can right-click on it and say Run on Server. We can put it into Apache Karaf, and we don't want to edit any deployment options. We now see that the bundle has been immediately installed. Our Apache Karaf instance had already been started, and that means that it recognized the deployment as a hot deployment and installed it immediately and started running it. We can come back to our Karaf shell here and list the bundles, and we can see that our bundle has been added. If you want to remove our bundle, we can right-click on it and say Remove Deployment. And if we wait a second or two, it should automatically publish and remove that bundle. Now we'll see that the output has switched to Goodbye World. And if we go back to our terminal and we do a bundle list, we'll see that it's not even installed, much less running. If we want to install it again, we can right-click on it, Run on Server, Apache Karaf, and we should see that it starts running immediately once again. If we go to our terminal, we can actually play with it and start and stop it as we wish. That's basically it for deploying very simple OSGI bundles to Apache Karaf. Hopefully this will get you started using Apache Karaf in VS Code. Now we're going to try to see if we can get an Apache Camel blueprint route installed into a running Karaf instance and be able to modify it and play with it a little bit and see how that works out. The official tutorial is up here at their Apache Karaf's GitHub, and they have the examples there. But the interesting thing is you don't actually have to download their examples to be able to run their example because they publish them to Maven repos, and Apache Karaf lets you install features from Maven repositories. So before we get started, let's first create and download and Apache Karaf 4.2.8. We had to upgrade to 4.2.8 because 4.2.7 had problems in their examples. So we've agreed to the license, we've let it install Apache Karaf. Now we'll start up the server and we'll connect to it with the Karaf shell. We'll agree to fingerprinting, and the password is, of course, Karaf. Now what we're going to do is we're going to copy some of the commands from the official tutorial, but we've had to change them. The official tutorial references the version latest, and we have to change it to 4.2.8. But now if we copy these commands in, maven org.apache.karaf.examples / karaf-camel-example-features / 4.2.8 / XML, and it adds the feature, and then if we do feature install karaf-camel-example-blueprint. And now this should install all the dependencies of their official example. And if we look at the bundle list, we'll see that it's installed a lot of things. Jackson, Java Mail, Camel, a whole lot of things. But the one that is their actual route has been installed here as bundle 66. It's their actual route. And if you look at an XML file at this URL, you can see the content of the route. Now I have copied those contents into a new file called myroute, which we will use shortly. But for now, I want to use the one that they've automatically installed. So you can see that it's already installed and it's already running. If we open a new terminal and we type this curl command, which tests the route, we can copy it here and we can paste it in here. And we'll see that we get a response. So this was our request, and this is our response. So they send the notification, the blueprint Apache Camel route responds and says, hey, we've received your request on port 9090 at this URL. Now what we'd like to do is we'd like to go back to our Karaf shell, and let's uninstall and get rid of that bundle. So we're going to do bundle stop 66, because it is number 66. And we're going to do bundle uninstall 66. And then we'll do a bundle list just to make sure it's not there anymore. And if we go back to our bash shell and we run that command again, we'll see that there's no connection. The route's been removed, Karaf has undeployed it, and now there's no connection there. Now here we have an identical copy of the route from the example. And if we want, we can change things of it, but we can change them in a little bit just to see what happens. There's no real need to change it at this moment, and I'll show that what we can do is we can just right click on it and go run on server. And we pick Apache Karaf 2.8. We don't edit any optional parameters. It appears to have been copied in, but nothing's been said. So if we come back here to our Karaf shell and do a bundle list, we'll see that my route has been added. Well, okay, it's been added. Is that enough? Well, let's go back to the bash shell and let's run that command one more time, and we do get a response. The response says email sent to foo@bar with the subject line. Well, let's try to change some of this. First, let's remove it. Let's remove the deployment via the UI. And it gets automatically unpublished. We come back to Karaf. We do bundle list. We can see it's gone. And if we go back to bash and try again, we'll see that there's no connection. It's been removed, it's been undeployed, and that's what we get. Now, we don't want to send the message, this is a test. We want to change the response. We want to make sure any changes we make to the route are changed. So let's come over here and let's look for an email sent. All right, so this is what we can change here. We can say our updated email sent. And we can save that file. And now let's try deploying it again. If we run it on the server to Apache Karaf, and we don't edit any optional parameters, we can go back to our karaf shell, do a bundle list, we see it's there. And if we go back to our bash shell and run our command, again, our curl, we'll see our updated email sent. So the changes that we made did take effect. Thing is, we removed the deployment, then we changed it, then we deployed it again. Let's see if it works if we don't remove anything and we just change the file without anything. Let's see if hot deploy can work here. Our updated email has been sent. Let's just make it pretty simple. We can see here that there's a publish required. Now it's been synchronized. The real question is, does the hot deploy work? If we come right to the terminal and we run it again, our updated email has been sent. So what this shows us is that as soon as we change our route here in our workspace, it gets hot deployed back into Karaf via the tooling. Karaf itself recognizes the hot deployment and redeploys the route or changes it as appropriate. And our response codes are now updated basically instantaneously. So this is one of the quickest ways to get started with Blueprint Camel projects on Karaf using the community server connector for VS Code. Now I'd like to show you the Apache Tomcat support in the community server connector extension for VS Code. Inside my workspace, you'll see that I have a very simple Servlet project. It has a POM, it has a web XML, and it basically just has a very simple servlet. The URL for this example is up here. It's a GitHub repo called Java Tutorial Network. And there is a folder in there called Simple Servlet. I've just imported the folder directly. In order to get started with the Apache Tomcat support, the first thing you need is to use your community server connector to download or create an Apache Tomcat server. Since I don't have one on disk, I'm just going to come in and download Apache Tomcat 9. And I'll agree to the license, and I'll say yes. And now Apache Tomcat 9 has been downloaded and installed into my RSP's working directory. I can start the server, and you'll see that the server starts up just about fine. And you can stop the server if you want, and you can see that you still get additional output. What we really want to do here, though, is we want to deploy this project, and that means that the first thing we need to do is we need to build the project. One of the extensions I have installed right now, in case you haven't seen some of the previous parts of the demo, is I have installed the RSP, the community server connector, and its dependencies. And I've also installed Java support, including their test runners, their extension pack, and some Maven support. So you might want to try to install some of those if you would like to follow along. The first thing you got to do when you have this tutorial example already made is you're going to come to the Maven projects view, and you're just going to right click and you're going to say install. It'll run the Maven command and it'll build an output war. And you can see here that now we have a target folder, and inside the target folder we have a war file. We also have an exploded folder that seems to include everything from the war that you would need, whether it's the classes or the web XML. For first, we're going to try to do a packaged deployment. And what you can do right here is you can just right click on the war file, and you can say run on server, Apache Tomcat, and we're not going to edit any additional options. We can see the server's running, and if you scroll back up, we can probably see that the simple servlet has been deployed. If we go look at our web XML, we'll see that the servlet name is simple servlet, and the URL pattern is /hello. So I'm not entirely sure why, but when we build this example, it has the name simpleservlet-1.war instead of just simpleservlet.war. I think it's using the Maven version in the packaging, And since this project only has the standard WebXML and doesn't have the Tomcat specific ones, the context route is not available. So if we want to browse to this after deploying it, we actually have to go to localhost 8080/simple servlet 1/hello. And then we'll see that it says hello world, which is what you'd expect if you went back and looked at the actual servlet. You'll see it says hello world whenever anyone makes a GET request to it. At this point now, what we can try to do is we can try to change that servlet. We can make it hello world 1. And then we'll see what happens. It looks to me like because this file has not changed here, but if we rebuild the app through the Maven tooling and we do install again, what we'll notice is that that output file, simple servlet 1.jar, has changed, and the tooling now says there's a publish required, which means it's about to copy over, and it does copy over a new version of the servlet. Now, and we type hello and we refresh the page, we get the new index. We can change that again just so you can see how that works. Just by saving it, it doesn't rebuild the project, so we still have to go and rerun the Maven command. But when we do that, the output file, simple servlet -1.war, changes. The server recognizes the change, it copies it over, and then we wait for Tomcat to recognize it. It says right here, Tomcat has now recognized. We can try to refresh that page, and we see hello world 2. Now this is how you deploy packaged web archives. But we want to try something a little bit different. We want to try to remove it, remove the deployment, and wait for the publish event. We'll see that the deployment gets removed here shortly. And the simple servlet has stopped. And now what we want to do is we want to try to deploy an exploded one. Now, in case you don't know this, when you deploy a web archive with a .war extension, Tomcat will explode it and leave it in a folder just called simple servlet -1. If we want to deploy this folder, which appears to have everything we need, it has the meta info, the webinf, the classes, and the webxml, we can try to deploy this folder, and we can try to say run this on the server. We'll run it on Tomcat. We won't change any of the names, and it'll be deployed as an exploded folder. At this point, we see that it is recognized. If we come back in, we're not going to see much of a change, so we should probably change this to 3, save the file, and rerun our build. When we do that, that output folder, simple servlet -1, should be changed. We see a publish is required. Our tooling copies it over. And since this is just a change to one file, we'll see if Tomcat can actually hot deploy it, and they do. So this is how you do exploded deployments in Tomcat. We haven't tested the Tomcat tooling on very large projects or projects with large dependencies between one WAR and another. But for now, this looks like a really good way to get started using Tomcat, and it's all part of the community server connector. So we think it's a nice little addition to have if you want to get started with Tomcat or play through some of these examples. So thank you so much, and have a good day.